Hey there, night owls. It's that time again when the lights dim, your eyes get heavy, and we quietly drift through thousands of years of history that you absolutely didn't ask for. But somehow, we're doing it anyway. Tonight, we're going back to a land of sand, gods, and very questionable fashion choices, where eyeliner wasn't gendered and people thought cats were divine, which, let's be honest, was probably their smartest belief. Welcome to ancient Egypt, a civilization so old that when Cleopatra was ruling, the Great Pyramid was already ancient. Yes, she was closer in time to the moon landing than to the pyramid being built. So, yeah, let's pour ourselves a metaphorical cup of Nile water and float slowly back to where it all began. The river that made everything possible. Before there were pharaohs or pyramids or even someone yelling, "I am the son of Ra, bow before me," there was just the Nile. Every single year, like clockwork, the river would flood. And instead of being annoyed about it like we'd be today, with insurance claims and Facebook complaints, the ancient Egyptians absolutely loved it. Because that flood was the reason they could live at all. When the waters rose, they soaked the land, leaving behind a thin layer of dark, rich soil. The locals called it the Black Land, the desert around it, the Red Land, which tells you everything you need to know about their naming creativity. Still, this simple rhythm, flood, plant, harvest, repeat, was the heartbeat of Egyptian civilization. So people began settling along the river, building small farming villages. They grew barley, wheat, and flax. They raised cattle, sheep, and goats. And as humans tend to do when left alone with food, water, and mild boredom, they started organizing themselves into little mini-kingdoms. The Two Lands. By around 3500 BCE, Egypt wasn't one country yet. It was actually two. Upper Egypt in the south, the narrow valley, and Lower Egypt in the north, the wide delta that fans out into the Mediterranean. Yes, the names are reversed because geography is cruel and rivers flow north. Upper Egypt was mostly desert and cliffs. Simple, tough, proud people who built small temples and probably looked down on their northern neighbors. Lower Egypt was swampy, green, and chaotic, full of traders, fishers, and people who had opinions about pottery styles. These two regions developed their own gods, crowns, and flags. Upper Egypt had the white crown, Lower Egypt had the red crown. Eventually, they would come together, in one of the earliest recorded cases of hostile corporate merger. King Narmer and the First Unification. By around 3100 BCE, a ruler named Narmer, sometimes called Menes because ancient names are messy like that, decided it was time to stop this two Egypts nonsense. He unified the north and south, probably through a mixture of diplomacy, war, and, let's be honest, sheer ego. He's often shown wearing both crowns stacked on top of each other, which must have looked ridiculous but made the point. He ruled all of Egypt. Narmer founded what historians call the First Dynasty, and with that, Egypt became one of the first true nations in history. No small tribes, no random villages, just one long, continuous kingdom, stretching along the Nile, bound together by gods, farming, and bureaucracy. So basically, it was the first working government, which means, yes, it also came with taxes. The early dynasties, bureaucracy, and tomb building. Once the first dynasty got going, the rulers realized something very important. If you're going to rule people for eternity, you'd better look the part. So they built palaces, tombs, and shrines. They invented a royal title, Pharaoh, meaning great house. Because why be a man when you can be a metaphor for an entire household of divine authority? The kings were seen as intermediaries between gods and humans. If the Nile flooded too little, people blamed the pharaoh. If it flooded too much, people still blamed the pharaoh. Basically, being divine came with terrible job reviews. To manage all of this, Egypt invented something that would change human history: writing. The gift of words, hieroglyphs. Sometime around 3100 BCE, Egyptian scribes developed hieroglyphic writing, a script of tiny pictures carved into stone or painted on papyrus. There were symbols for words, sounds, and entire concepts. A little owl might mean the letter M, a reed might mean I, and a seated god meant, well, usually trouble. It was both art and language, beautiful and hopelessly complicated. Learning it required years of training, which meant only the elite could write. So congratulations, that's how bureaucracy was born. Scribes became the backbone of Egyptian government, recording taxes, laws, royal decrees, and every grain of wheat that moved. Without them, the state would have collapsed faster than a sandcastle in a flood. The Old Kingdom, Egypt's golden start. By around 2700 BCE, Egypt entered what historians call the Old Kingdom, a period so stable and rich that later generations looked back on it as the good old days. The capital was moved to Memphis. Yes, the original Memphis, strategically placed between Upper and Lower Egypt. From there, kings ruled with the help of priests, scribes, and a growing army of loyal bureaucrats. But the real stars of this era weren't the kings themselves, it was their tombs. The Age of Pyramids. If you were a pharaoh, you didn't just want to rule Egypt, you wanted to rule forever. And forever requires good architecture. So the Egyptians started small, with mastabas, rectangular tombs made of mud brick. Then along came Imhotep, the world's first recorded architect, and yes, later turned into a Hollywood mummy villain because that's gratitude for you. Imhotep designed something revolutionary for his king, Djoser, the step pyramid of Saqqara. It wasn't just a tomb, it was a stairway to the heavens, literally shaped like one. People were amazed. Djoser became semi-divine. Imhotep became a legend. And once one pharaoh built a pyramid, everyone else thought, yeah, I want one too. Thus began Egypt's pyramid arms race. The Great Pyramid craze. Fast forward to around 2600 BCE, the Fourth Dynasty. This was the era of Sneferu, the overachieving king who decided to experiment with pyramid design like a kid testing Minecraft builds. His first attempt, the bent pyramid, didn't quite go as planned. The angle was too steep, so they had to change it halfway through, hence bent. But Sneferu didn't give up. He built another, the Red Pyramid, which finally nailed the geometry. Then came his son, Khufu, who looked at all this and said, cool, let's go bigger. Thus was born the Great Pyramid of Giza, a monument so huge and precise that we're still arguing about how they built it. Probably a combination of ramps, levers, and very tired workers who were not slaves, contrary to popular myth. They were skilled laborers, paid in bread and beer, which honestly sounds like the world's first union deal. Khufu's pyramid was followed by those of Khafre and Menkaure, his successors. Together they formed the Giza complex, a skyline of stone that's still standing 4,500 years later. Meanwhile, most modern buildings don't last 50. The pharaoh's divine ego. The Old Kingdom pharaohs weren't just kings anymore. They were gods on earth. Their word was law, their image sacred, and their afterlife destination a guaranteed VIP suite in the sky. Temples were built in their honor. Priests multiplied. The economy boomed, though, as always, mostly for the people on top. Of course, divine ego came with divine costs. By the end of the Old Kingdom, so much wealth had been poured into pyramid building that the government's resources started to dry up. The priests got richer, the farmers got poorer, and the Nile, always the moody one, decided to flood irregularly for a few decades. That was enough to send the whole thing wobbling. Collapse and chaos. Around 2200 BCE, the Old Kingdom collapsed into what historians call the First Intermediate Period, which sounds academic,
but really means nobody knew who was in charge anymore. Regional governors, called nomarchs, took power in their provinces. Kings came and went so fast that scribes stopped bothering to record all their names. The economy tanked, tombs were looted, art got worse, always a sign that things aren't going well. And ordinary people began writing something new: complaint letters. One text from this era literally says, "The great no longer rule, and the poor now own sandals." Truly, a civilization in crisis. But Egypt always comes back. And yet, Egypt didn't stay down. Out of the chaos came new leaders, new gods, and a renewed sense of unity. But that's for another night. Because we're only halfway through the river, and Egypt still
has a few thousand years left to go. The Middle Kingdom, the New Kingdom, and eventually a certain Cleopatra who'd make it all famous again. For now, let's close our eyes, imagine the slow whisper of the Nile, and drift between mud brick villages, golden tombs, and the first stirrings of empire. Because in the end, that's where humanity's long obsession with power, death, and legacy began. Sleep well, pharaohs.